Hey, there we go. So welcome everybody to another rendition of Dominate the Nation. I'm Maxine Dugan, and I've got my special guest, Bella Robinson.
Hi, everyone. I'm Bella Robinson, Executive Director of Coyote RI, Call Off Your Old Tired Ethics. Thanks for inviting me, Maxine.
Yes, great. So we've got Rhode Island and San Francisco to try to give hopefully some information about how to talk about the Gilgo Beach murder victims. I know people are stumbling over the sex worker term and the prostitution term and the escort term. And, between Bella and I, we have got several decades, if not like at least a half a century of
40 years each.
How many years do you think of actual working in the business do you think we have between us?
Well, I have 40, you have 30 or 40, so yeah.
Yeah. And then in terms of activism, I mean, we've got multiple decades there. Yeah. So yeah, we just have been watching with angst how the reporters are talking about the Gilgo Beach murder victims, and we wanted to kind of chime in and talk a little bit about how to talk about us. It sounds to me, Bella, I don't know, that most of the victims in this particular case were working off of Backpage, or do you think it was Craigslist?
I'm pretty sure it was either Craigslist or Backpage. And, with the media, I was thrilled that they finally called us sex workers rather than prostitutes or trafficking victims. But they didn't ever talk about the safety or the problems. They just kind of ignored who was involved and why this happened.
Yeah. And, it's great that we've seen some people in the sex trade or former workers be able to come forward and, give some statements that are local to that area there. I thought it was kind of a bummer to see people talk about how their drug addiction had forced them to work in the industry. And, they were doing it in this real apologetic sort of way, you know what I mean? And that's okay. But people should not have to apologize for working in the sex trade. Prostitution is a social safety net in this country. And, we all know that, and the public should just, acknowledge that, but that's the situation that criminalization has put us in. That, there's a bunch of reasons why people work in the sex trade, whatever their reasons are, it's okay. I myself say I work as a prostitute, when I'm talking to people, because I want people to know exactly what type of sex work I'm doing. So when you say the sex work term, sometimes it's really broad, and people think, what do people think when they hear the sex worker term?
Exactly. They don't know if they're a dancer, a legal worker, or what they're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, they could be an online content creator. You could see, exotic dancers hate the sex worker term, or, they want to be called exotic dancers. People that work as escorts, they want to be called escorts. So I think it's just important. I don't know what you think, Bella, is that you should just ask people, how do you like to refer to your work before you start interviewing them and talking to them?
And I also think, the media, one reporter went and interviewed a couple girls in jail, which is really exploitative. They did have a couple girls that didn't book with the killer, but had audio recordings of the conversation. But the mainstream media has not reached out to any sex worker rights organization that might know something about this. The average sex worker doesn't care about their rights until they're raped, robbed, or murdered, arrested, something bad happens, and they don't understand the issues or the government-funded misinformation campaign on trafficking.
Right. So we did see, I think it was the Suffolk County commissioner, police commissioner, or no, it was the sheriff. It was the sheriff county who said, oh, these are all sex trafficking victims. And he started using the sex trafficking term to be able to talk, about us. And I thought that's really some bad information there, straight from the cop's mouth.
when you're talking about how they want to bring up drugs or these women were poor, they never compare us to any other labor sector. Because I want to know how many Walmart workers are poor and how many of them are on drugs. Because you can't, you can't paint any population with one brush stroke. We're not saying all sex workers are nice people. Not everyone's cut out to be one. We're just people. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I love that. That's a great point because, when they go to report, oh, somebody's a domestic violence victim or somebody was killed on her job, they don't say, oh yeah, there were a lawyer or a Walmart worker or, stuff like that. They don't generally identify murder victims by the type of work they did. But in our case, in the Gilgo Beach case, this is a situation where the workers were killed on their job.
And I remember years ago, there was a realtor that was sexually assaulted sharing a house. No one shamed her. Why were you alone with the client? Right?
Oh, yeah.
And we actually have to Google dead prostitute in all the different states to come up with our memorial list every December. That's the only way we can find this information.
That's
but
right.
If you're a nurse or a teacher, they don't put murdered nurse and think about what would have happened had this been 11 nurses murdered on Gilgo Beach or 11 teachers. I think the whole response, the media, the police and everything would have been totally different.
Yeah, so let's start to talk a little bit about the police response, and what happened and, why a decade plus later are we, we saw this particular task force be effective. And, the other investigation that took place initially, wasn't effective.
And it all keeps coming down to this chief of police named John Burke. And before they made him chief, it was common knowledge that he was asking other cops for snuff films. He was attending sex parties with sex workers, but they still made him chief. So then around 2015, some guy on heroin breaks into his car, steals a bag of sex toys that has snuff films. The very next day, they kick in this guy's door, the chief with the detective. The chief beats him up, tells him, no one will ever believe you. I can give you a hot shot and kill you and your whole family. So the FBI come in and do because he was actually obstructing the FBI joining the investigation. Well, they did arrest him. He went to jail for 5 years, and the guy he beat up got $5 million. But another thing, when they did a subpoena to get the pings off that cell tower, John Burke shut them down and wouldn't let them have it, claiming that it was too intrusive, like as if they care about our privacy. So his name came up over and over and over again. And then when I was listening to the Unravel podcast, one of the sex workers had been to one of these sex parties, took them and pointed out the house they had him in. And they didn't say who owned the house, but they did say it was a high-level government official. So I'm not saying all government officials and cops are predators looking for snuff films, but obviously that is another reason to hide this. So all of a sudden, if the feds didn't intervene when John Burke was doing all this in 2015, why this sudden interest in February 2022, where they get everything they need and wrap it up within weeks? And I was sick to my stomach listening to these cops pat themselves on the back, make sure each one of them got their name for all this years of hard work and we never gave up. And which brings me back to Shannon Gilbert. Shannon Gilbert called 911 from a gated community. You listen to the call. They're after me. They're going to kill me. She didn't know where she was. 2 other homeowners dialed 911. When the cops arrived, they didn't look for her for 5 minutes. And 8 or 9 months later, her body's found 3/4 of a mile away. Had they looked for her, they would have found her. And we know if that had been a senator's daughter, we would have had helicopters in the air and dogs on the scene within an hour. So and that's why they want to say undetermined death, but there was only a 1/4 inch of rain in the marsh. I remember her jeans were found like a 1/4 mile for her body. Like, you might lose a shoe running through the marsh, but you don't come out of your jeans. So I do believe she was murdered. And they failed from the get-go because, police call us NHI for no human involved, and they're not really interested in who's trying to rape, rob, and murder us.
Yeah, I mean, we don't care if cops are having sex parties. I mean, we're not going to diss anybody for having sex parties. The problem is that the cops are in charge of arresting us for prostitution. And now they're supposed to be the ones who are doing the investigations for when we're raped, robbed, and murdered. I mean, that's just a clear conflict of interest. And the FBI, falls in that category too, as do all the other federal agencies, because those federal agencies are the ones that are putting up the money to do all these human trafficking stings, which are actually anti-prostitution sting operations where they're arresting adults, consensual adults, for consensual sex. And so, it's just a huge conflict of interest. In this case is the example. It's going to be the example forever now about why cops cannot be in charge of, either they can't be in charge of arresting us for prostitution, or they can't be doing the investigations when these crimes happen to us. So
investigate themselves when there's wrongdoing, right?
Yeah, the public needs to understand the role that they set cops up in, and renaming us as sex trafficking victims doesn't really change anything for us. It's always still a prostitution sting operation, right? So
and I think a lot of people don't understand what affirmative defense is, because they think we have all these, the public doesn't understand that they arrest sex trafficking victims. In Rhode Island, for affirmative defense is you're arrested, you end up on the news, and when you go to court, you can claim you're a victim and they can't prosecute you, but they've already ruined your life. They might as well have, prosecuted you.
The arrest itself causes
trauma,
like a whole slew of problems.
Discrimination for life.
In Sacramento, they were doing a human trafficking, action, but really it was an anti-prostitution sting operation. And when they arrested people, they videotaped everything. And they had this obviously high quality editor who edited out the people who were arrested, but they put all their names and their ages in the description of the YouTube video.
Exactly.
So, though having your name associated with a prostitution arrest means that it sets you up for all types of discrimination. You can be discriminated in, gaining access to housing. If somebody Googles your name and, oh, you're on YouTube being arrested for being human trafficking. Are you a human trafficker? You can be discriminated against in gaining access to financial institutions like banks, child custody issues. You can be discriminated against in gaining access to certain education tracks that require a security clearance at the end or some sort of background check and certificate. We've seen that. How many times have we seen people lose track of their education because they got that prostitution arrest,
For future employment, they even fired the girl at Taco Bell because she had been in porn and someone recognized her. Like, if you can't work at Taco Bell, where can you work?
Well, and that's legal work. Working in porn and adult film content creating, exotic dancer, phone sex operator, chat lines. Those are all legal parts of the sex industry. Why are people discriminating against what's already legal? And so, this Gilgo Beach murder case just exemplifies to me why the police can, we want decriminalization, right? That's what we want.
And not almost always, but often when there's a serial killer, there's always been a sex worker that got away, that didn't report it because they didn't want to be arrested. They don't trust the police. The police are the bad guys in our industry to us. Even in our charging document report in Rhode Island, we found 55 incidents where the cops felt comfortable in their own handwriting, admitting to engaging in some kind of sexual conduct during the vice sting, and that is state-sponsored rape. So think about it, they're using force, coercion, or fraud to arrest us, which is the definition of trafficking.
God, it's just crazy. Yeah, I mean, how many people, the public doesn't understand that the police, under that criminalization of prostitution, it's criminalized on a state by state basis, that the police are allowed to have sexual contact with us. They're allowed to go all the way and then turn around and arrest us for prostitution. So, that is sexual assault. And if you're using prostitution stings as the means to identify sex trafficking victims, and you're having that same, violent, disrespectful action towards
What if
sex
someone is a
trafficking
victim? What if they are 17? Right.
Oh my God, Bella. It's just
never
horrifying.
it's never appropriate. It's not, which comes down to our health and safety, that we should have the right to report crimes against ourselves and threats and violence, because they often, hear victims. A lot of them don't want to take any responsibility for their drug addiction. And my drug addiction was not empowering. I was addicted to crack, working the streets, but no one made me do it. And part of recovery is owning up to it and not, I got to be accountable. And then part of me always wants to say, well, you weren't locked in a basement. You had a phone, you had the internet, you were in and out of hotel. Why didn't you ever tell anyone? Why did you become a victim the day you were arrested? Because the anti-prostitution people tell them, if you just say you were scared or forced, we can wash the shame off of you and you can be a proper woman again. But what they find out is they still treat them like whores. And I'll give you an example. This church saved these women, and the women started marrying men in the congregation, and the women got so upset. Like, really? Again, you can't.
Oh, the whores married in and they got mad. Lord.
And that's what, you remember the websites that want to take a picture, back up every escort ad, every couple minutes on all these major sites. They really want to make sure that we can't be the value member of society, that we can never become anything else. And then they can throw shade at us to make themselves look better, while they do all the corruption and let the priests rape children and all that great stuff.
Yeah. And so that's what we're really after here. We want the right to be able to negotiate for our own labor and our own safe work conditions. And, to help the people who, are using our industry to get by, help them get on to their next right thing without a prostitution arrest, for Christ's sake.
And
how many of our customers have provided somebody that they came upon, they responded to an ad and they realized, this person doesn't belong here. And they'd give them money, they help rent them hotel rooms, get their ID, buy them a phone, get them some food, get them on to their next right thing. We don't want our customers arrested. When customers are victims of crime, if they're ripped off or, extorted, attempted extortion, they should be able to report that.
Or they show up and instead of me or you being there, it's a 14-year-old. You want them to dial 911 and tell, but we don't have pay phones. There's no way to make an anonymous call. And as far as safety, let's talk about pandering and promoting. It's common sense when we work together, we're safer. It's
Truly.
Common sense. That's why there's two people in a convenience store on the night shift. There's never just one. Okay. Yeah. We're not like a store where we got cameras everywhere or, so charging people with felonies for pandering and promoting when they're actually sex workers themselves. And to give an example, me and you ran a hotel. I'm assaulted. I want to report it to the police, but they want to arrest you for pandering and promoting because the hotel's in your name. And I didn't even give you $1.
Right. Yeah,
right? So they're taking away our safety.
Yeah.
Which brings us to the immunity bills that we're trying to pass. And I know California passed a great one, Alaska, some other states have passed one. These are, you would not be able to arrest people for misdemeanor level prostitution charges if it was a violent crime like trafficking, murder, robbery, bad things. It's not about snitching on each other. It's about, do you want to charge me with a misdemeanor, or do you want me to tell you who this guy is that's murdering people so he doesn't go continue to do it. And another thing I wanted to bring up when I thought about the snuff films again, like you said, hey, cops having sex parties, they got a right, they're adults. But imagine, because I'm sure you've had a client, I've had clients where they want to look at a little porn on their phone while they're there. If I saw someone looking at some snuff films, I don't think they'd be a client very long. There's obviously things, we have boundaries, things that are not appropriate, that make us uncomfortable, that we're just not willing to, and we'd be blacklisting him everywhere. Oh, look out for Joe. He's
Yeah,
right.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. People, there's a bunch of people like you and I, Bella, who have worked in the industry and we're not dead. Okay. So obviously we have figured out, under the, war on us, under the criminalization, how to do it. So it's doable. It's totally doable to be able to work safely. But the criminalization of prostitution creates all the unsafe work conditions, and it criminalizes our ability to negotiate for our own, wage, what type of sex acts we want to do or don't do, and how much we want to charge for it. No, you cannot send me a comment or hit me up and ask me for services. No, you can't do that. This is for informational purposes only right now. I don't know about you, but lately,
I'm
every
not
time
down
I
with that
speak
either.
out, somebody calls me and goes, hey, can
Yeah.
you blah, blah, blah? And I'm like, click. You can't say it. That's the problem with criminalization. You can't say it.
Yeah.
You can't say no. You can't ask for the type of money that you want to be able to do that. That's the problem with criminalization, is you have all these bad negotiations. And so I think in the Gilgo Beach case, we saw that one former worker talk about, she brought security. Of course she brought security, but under the sex trafficking laws, that security can be charged as a sex trafficker. And murderers and perpetrators know that. They prey on us because the criminalization leaves us outside of equal protection under the law. And that's what they bet on, that we're not going to tell, that, we're not going to be missed, that our community isn't going to miss us, that, if our community members go and report us missing, the police are not going to take it seriously.
Exactly. And it's just not okay in any form, shape, or way. It's just not okay.
Yeah.
And we've even seen the discrimination for the legal workers, locking them out of banking institute. They can lose custody of their children. During COVID, we gave out a lot of, mini grants, mostly to dancers. And a huge majority of them had already had their children taken away. And you can't convince me all of them were bad mothers.
Right.
Like, maybe a couple of. And I know a lot of dancers, they actually have an overnight babysitter at their home, right? They don't just leave their kids in the middle of the night. And
if you want to, you could open up a daycare that operates at night just for people that work at night. Exactly. There's a bunch of us that have worked at night and need childcare. Or, there's things that we need. There's ways to be helpful to people in our industry instead of jumping on these trafficking bandwagons and, that are used to just recriminalize us as sex traffickers and increase the high fines and fees. So let's wrap up here and let's say our last words, and let's what are you guys working on at Coyote, Rhode Island?
Okay, so if people go to our Twitter at Coyote RI, we have pinged a little, at the ping, we have some of our flyers. We have an immunity bill, was called H6064. Next year it'll have a new name, but it was the same immunity bill. We also have a QR code, so you can get the immunity toolkit. So we're running a survey, and this is how we bring the voices of criminalized people to legislators who obviously want to stay anonymous because they're criminalized. And we're doing the story banks nationwide. So if Maryland wants the immunity bill, we can share Maryland's data and US data with them. And also,
so when we're talking about immunity bills, we're talking about a bill that says if you're a victim or a witness to crime, that you can report without being arrested for prostitution. And so what you're talking about is collecting the stories from people about how, because they were criminalized, they were not able to report specific times when they were victims or witnesses to crime because they were afraid of being arrested for
Exactly.
prostitution,
Or
right?
even when they were or even when they're threatened by police, like, I'm going to
Mm,
arrest you, give me a freebie, or I know where you live, or you pick up a stalker, and you can't call the cops and say, I've got this stalker, because you're a whore, right?
right.
They're not going to help you. So yeah, all of those things. So and again, it's crimes against people. It's not moral crimes. It's not about snitching on each other. It's stopping violent predators. And all the state has to do is not arrest people for simple misdemeanors.
Yeah, because I don't know about you, but I think like in the Gilgo Beach person that's been arrested, like the Green River Killer, like those types of guys, they're on our radar.
Mhm.
Like there's some workers that have seen those guys and have gone, that dude's on the bad list. I mean, like, one of the former workers, said about the Gilgo Beach killer, that they had them already logged in their phone as, do not answer this call.
And
So
also
I
when
think
Shannon
if we could
Gilbert's,
work with with our own community, I mean, this is how we work with our own community to keep our own selves safe, is to share that information, which many times is criminalized under the sex trafficking laws or the pimping and pandering laws or the conspiracy laws. So, sharing that information within our community is highly important, and being able to tell, being able to become witnesses. If Rex goes to trial, yeah, should be whores on parade, testifying against him about what he's about. Mm-hmm.
I mean, this all reminds me of Joey the player. So he was the guy that was exploiting high price escorts, having them come down from, he'd send a private car to New York to New Jersey, promise them 6,000, 7,000. When they got there, he'd beat them up and rape them. And finally, someone got the FBI involved, and 3 of them came forward. And next thing you know, he already, after Foster and all the blacklist went down, he started to reappear. And it was in Massachusetts, and they got him in Massachusetts and extradited. And I remember writing a letter to the judge. We were asking him to be held with no bond, because he is and he was the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. And we would show them, because I'm pretty sure he tried to book with me twice. And he doesn't even try to change his name. He'll give you his passport. He's like, Joey. I'm like, nah, not for me, and he only went after high-priced sex workers that do screen, because we know there's a lot of people that are vulnerable or desperate that don't screen. So luckily he wasn't on Backpage doing that, or he had even more victims. So
Yeah.
we have the right to be safe, and we do want the media to engage with us and start to understand some of the research that we've done.
Yeah. Yeah,
and
to
the
be able to speak sensibly about the industries. Yeah, so as PLERP, the Erotic Service Providers Legal Education and Research Project, we just did this report that came out in February that talks about all the technology that police are using to do these prostitution arrests. So it's a lot of technology, and so it's a lot of privacy violations that's going on. The police are, scraping all this data, giving it to the tech companies. The tech companies are, giving it back to the police. It's just a real problem, and we know if they're doing that type of disrespectful and civil right violation stuff on our community, they're coming for the general public. That's really, we're just sort of the test samples here when that comes to people having to deal with all these technologies that are unregulated, and specifically when they violate the search and seizure constitution. So anyway, so you can follow us on, I'm at SPLERP, the Erotic Service Providers Legal Education and Research Project, SPLERP. I'll put it all in the notes, the show notes here. I'll put your QR code, and people can reach out to us. Certainly reporters, you and I are very public, and in being able to speak at, we speak at colleges and, to groups and all kinds of people to help them get educated about what's going on in the whore nation. And certainly we want to bring some sanity to the discussion around the Gilgo Beach murder victims. Yeah. Because, you know, I don't know about you, but I cried for 2 days when they arrested him. I was just disabled for 2 days again.
It is. It's traumatic and and I remember making the memorial list when I did the big one going back to 1836, seeing one or two in the media from time. But when you start to create the list, or you're hearing about the 11 names, it is really traumatizing. And I recently told someone, you know, I've been traumatized by being in prison, being raped by correctional officers, but it's not good for your mental health to take in the hostility from society on a daily basis, like both of us do, from being out admitting I'm a prostitute. It's just not, but we can't give up, because more women are going to die, and there's going to be a next generation of sex workers. And with laws like FOSTA and the whole trafficking there, it's like Hunger Games. It's like they want us dead. But, you know, if they admit that, some people might say it's not nice. So we'll just call them victims, but we still want them dead. Yeah. But thanks so much for your time and for doing this. And people can always email me at bella@coyoteri.org.
Thanks a bunch for taking your time this morning, Bella. I appreciate you and appreciate all the hard work that you do.
Ditto, girl.
Okay, I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thank you. Have a great day.
Okay, so